Parisian Police Commission Museum. Behind these displays lies the most incredible collection of objects in the history of criminality in France. The eyepiece to the peephole through which Dr. Petiot watched his agonizing victims, the rope that was used to strangle Bailiff Gouffet, Landru's stove. Knives, revolvers, truncheons, all these weapons have been used to commit the most abominable crimes. From the 19th century onwards, the police begins turning to science to help them solve their cases. Anthropometry, the study of the human iris, graphology, and morphopsychology are all used. In the museum archives, original reports, questioning transcriptions, and sketches of crime scenes will take you on the bloody trail of the most infamous murderers in history. In 1933, in Mons, the particularly horrific murder of Mrs. Lancelin and her daughter Geneviève shocked public opinion. Two maids, Christine and Lea Papin, quickly admit to the crime. What could have possibly driven the two sisters to such a savage act? Were they insane? The world of psychoanalysis turns to study the issue. Why? Jacques Lacan speaks of the délire à deux, a twin delirium, one of the oldest forms of psychosis. The press supports the hypothesis of an act symbolizing class struggle, an idea taken up by numerous intellectuals, notably the Surrealists. The case has inspired many literary and artistic creations. Jean Genet and his play, The Maids. Jean-Paul Sartre, Jean-Louis Bory, Jean Vautier, Nico Papatakis, Paul Eluard, and many others have written about the subject. In 2000, Jean-Pierre Denis directs the film Murderous Maids, with Sylvie Testude and Julie-Marie Parmentier in the roles of Christine and Lea Papin. But no one has managed to answer the question satisfactorily. Why such savagery towards the victims' bodies? The Papin sisters' heinous crime. February the 2nd, 1933, at the Central Police Station in Le Mans. Mr. Lancelin and his son-in-law, Mr. Renard, come to report a situation of some concern. Mr. Lancelin lives close by at 6 Rue Bruyère. Despite the presence of his wife, daughter, and their two housemaids, no one answers the doorbell or the two men's calls. The door is bolted on the inside, and Mr. Lancelin is unable to open it. He's sure that something must be wrong. As for Mr. Renard, he reports noticing something glowing inside, a candle perhaps, which alarms Mr. Lancelin, who does not understand why the lights haven't been turned on. At the police station, Sergeant Rialon begins to take the case seriously. He questions Lancelin. How long ago did you notice that no one was answering? The first time was at 6:30. And you only come to report it now, says the sergeant, casting a glance at his watch. He decided that they'd lost enough time, suspecting that a prowler might well have broken into the house and tied up all those inside while they took their time helping themselves to any of their belongings. He set off with two officers, Mr. Ragot and Mr. Verité, to apprehend the offender. Mr. Lancelin and Mr. Renard followed behind. In order to catch the crook red-handed, the two officers will discreetly climb over the courtyard wall and into the back of the house. The glass door of the vestibule is locked, but a slight pressure exerted by Officer Ragot pushes the window catch open. Inside, not a noise is to be heard. The flashlight reveals a bourgeois interior, but no one can be found on the ground floor. The intruder must be hiding in the bedrooms on the first floor. Gun in hand, The officers cautiously climb the stairs. Suddenly, the flashlight's beam picks up a round object. Leaning towards what looks like a marble, Officer Verité's face is suddenly overcome with terror. The object is not a marble, but a human eye. Horror-struck, they climb the last few steps, and there, on the landing, they come across the bodies of Mrs. Lancelin and her daughter, lacerated with stab wounds, their faces reduced to a pulp. The murderer who hammered away at his victims was a bloodthirsty maniac. The two servants must have suffered the same fate, and the killer was probably still in the house. Doing their best not to be sick, the officers go back downstairs to open the door to Sergeant Rialon. Another pair of hands to overpower the individual won't go amiss. They had barely unlocked the door when the sergeant entered. There's been trouble, Officer Ragot tells him, and designating Lancelin and Renard with his eyes, adds, those two had better not come in. Despite Mr. Lancelin's protests, the two men are kept away. At the site of the two corpses, everything is methodically organized. The superintendent, the examining magistrate, and the coroner are summoned. The two officers then resume their search for the criminal, who is certainly hiding somewhere in the house. On the first floor, the three bedrooms searched one after the other, but do not reveal anything suspicious. The police continue their investigation on the upper floor. The attic is empty. So is the laundry. Apart from an iron left on the ironing board next to a wrinkled shirt, a signal that work was interrupted abruptly. Only one room is left. The killer and the housemaids must be there. The door is locked from the inside. "Police, open the door," shouts one of the officers. But there's no response. "They might all be dead in there," he says. "We need the locksmith straight away." They wait anxiously for the craftsman to come and unlock the door with their ear glued to the door, but there is still no sound from within. Suddenly, a loud sound of brakes can be heard from outside. It's Sergeant Dupuis, who's come to take the matters in hand. He's followed by the locksmith, who will finally be able to lift the mystery. After some probing around in the lock, the key on the other side falls onto the floor, and with a flick of the hand, he makes the lock-picking hook turn. The door is unlocked. The two officers point their guns and then thrust the door open. Horror gives way to incomprehension. The two maids are there, alive, lying in the same bed, dressed in just their bathrobe. "We were expecting you," says the elder. The scene is astonishing. Next to the bed, a candle is placed on a saucer, on top of a stool, right next to a hammer covered in blood. "What did you do to your masters?" asks Sergeant Dupuis, stupefied. "They wanted to hit me, so I got my own back. It was either us or them. I would rather do my masters in than let them do us in." "Your names?" asks the sergeant. "Christine and Lea Papin. I'm Christine." "Get up and get dressed. You murdered Mrs. Lancelin and her daughter all by yourself?" Lea cries out, "Miss Geneviève, that was me." "I killed the mother," says Christine calmly. "They shouldn't have threatened us. They threatened us and, well, they got what was coming to them," Lea says. "Get up," repeats the sergeant. "If I want to," replies Christine, not in the least scared. The two sisters dress while the sergeant tries to find out more. He questions Lea, who seems to be the most fragile. This proves futile, as with just one glance towards her sister, she turns to silence. "I am deaf and dumb," she says, taunting the sergeant. "Take them away," he finally says to his men.
Alors, le jour du crime, la presse va entrer en concurrence. Là, il ne s'agit pas d'une émulation ni d'une simple rivalité. Il y a à ce moment-là, sur place, deux grands journaux régionaux ou locaux. Le premier, c'est le journal de la Sarthe, et puis le second périodique, c'est Ouest Éclair. Les deux journaux vont être sur place par l'entremise de journalistes. D'après les différents récits, manifestement, donc l'un des deux journalistes a donné des informations ahurissantes de précision. Donc c'est des éléments qu'il n'a pas pu inventer, et il semble peu probable que le soir même, il ait pu recueillir ça de la bouche des représentants, soit du parquet, soit des policiers. Quant au second journal, il a aussi donné des éléments d'information du premier interrogatoire des deux sœurs. Et donc là, dans un cas, on a vraiment l'impression que le journaliste est sur place dans la pièce, qu'il a parcouru les différents étages. Et puis, dans le deuxième cas, le sentiment qui domine, c'est que le journaliste aussi est présent derrière peut-être la cloison du bureau du commissaire ou du palais de justice où se font les premiers interrogatoires.
The first report of the findings describes the horror of the scene. Geneviève Lancelin's body lies face down, the right arm extended, her hand covered in blood, some of her hair glued to it. Deep wounds can be seen on the gluteus, and her calves are severely lacerated. Mrs. Lancelin's body lies on its back, legs apart. Only the right foot has a shoe on. The deceased lady had the right side of her face and skull completely smashed in. The eyes have been removed. The mouth is no longer. The teeth were projected here and there. We found a detached eye on the top step of the staircase leading down to the ground floor, 2.25 meters away from the body. And the second will later be found underneath the body when it will be removed. Bone and teeth fragments are found here and there, as well as hairpins, combs, a hair slide. The murder weapons are a kitchen knife with a triangular blade and a black handle, covered in blood. It's found against Mrs. Lancelin's body at the height of the right hip. A heavy pewter pot, also covered in blood, has hair stuck to it. A hammer, covered in blood, found near the Papin sisters' bed.
Les lieux du crime occupent dans les affaires criminelles une place de plus en plus importante, et les spécialistes de la police et de la justice l'ont signalé dès la fin du 19e siècle. Dans les années 1880-1890, on assiste à l'éclosion d'une littérature spécialisée sur le sujet. On est en 1930, on a un personnage qui est à ce moment-là connu à l'échelle européenne, qui est Edmond Locard, qui est donc le responsable du premier laboratoire de police scientifique qui est installé à Lyon, qui est l'auteur de toute une série d'ouvrages, d'articles. Il a même dirigé donc plusieurs revues. Et donc, en le lisant, on sait bien qu'il s'est exclamé à plusieurs reprises: la scène de crime est essentielle. Il ne faut rien déplacer, il ne faut pas la brouiller. Le moindre petit élément, le petit indice ou la petite trace peut permettre de retrouver éventuellement donc l'identité de l'assassin, ou du moins de permettre de reconstituer ce qui s'est véritablement dépassé et dans quel ordre chronologique. Or là, évidemment, avec cette affaire des sœurs Papin, ces conseils ou ces recommandations ne sont absolument pas suivis. Sans doute pour une raison simple, c'est d'abord, lorsque les policiers arrivent dans la maison, là, la maison est plongée dans l'obscurité. Bon. Voilà. Donc évidemment, il y a des tâtonnements, donc, ce qui explique aussi que l'escalier qui a été gravi l'a été dans la pénombre. Ensuite, ils ont trouvé donc un œil humain qui a été arraché donc, violemment. Donc on peut supposer que la stupeur des policiers peut expliquer qu'il n'ait pas respecté un certain nombre de règles. Et lorsque les policiers, évidemment, arrivent sur le premier, là aussi, c'est une scène d'horreur effroyable. Il y a des traces de sang qui s'élèvent jusqu'à 2,20 mètres de hauteur à partir des premières déclarations. Donc ces deux corps de femmes ensanglantés, tailladés. Et à ce moment-là, on peut comprendre, évidemment, la stupeur de ceux qui sont sur place. Les bonnes sont au premier, sont dans l'étage au-dessus. Il faut encore gravir l'escalier. La porte est fermée à clé. on envoie chercher un serrurier. Et donc à ce moment-là, vous vous imaginez sans mal tous les déplacements, les allers-retours. Voilà. Et donc la scène de crime, de toute façon, donc, est bouleversée. Elle est aussi bouleversée pour une autre raison. On prend des photos de la scène de crime, et plus particulièrement des cadavres des deux femmes. Et ces cadavres de deux femmes sont des cadavres qui, à ce moment-là, ne peuvent pas être montrés publiquement, puisque le corps des deux victimes ont non seulement été tailladés, massacrés comme la presse le dira, mais les sous-vêtements ont été abaissés, les jupes ont été relevées, et finalement, donc, les parties sexuelles des deux victimes sont pratiquement mises à nu et donc offertes au regard. Et à ce moment-là, il n'est pas possible qu'une scène similaire soit proposée, si je puis dire, à ceux qui vont regarder donc les photographies. Et donc les jupes, évidemment, par décence, sont un petit peu donc rabaissées.
Christine Papin's first questioning, confirmed by her sister Lea, is a matter of consternation. My mistresses, she says, came in around 5:30. It was dark and the street shutters had been closed by my sister. During their absence, the iron had broken, just like yesterday, as a matter of fact. It had been repaired and had gone to pick it up at Boucheries. When Madame came back, I informed her that the iron was once again broken and that I hadn't been able to iron. When I told her this, she was about to set upon me. At the time, my sister and I, as well as my two mistresses, were on the first floor landing. Seeing that Miss Lancelin was about to come down to me, I leapt at her face and tore her eyes out with my fingers. Meanwhile, my sister jumped on Mrs. Lancelin and also tore her eyes out. When we'd done this, they were lying or kneeling on the floor. I then rushed down to the kitchen and fetched a hammer and a knife. With these two instruments, my sister and I lashed out at our two mistresses. We hit them on the head with a hammer, and we also hit them with a pewter pot that had been placed on a small table on the landing. The two of us swapped instruments several times. That is to say, I passed my sister the hammer to hit with, and she passed me the knife. We did the same with the pewter pot. When we had done the deed, I went to bolt the lock, and I also closed the vestibule door. Then my sister and I went to wash our hands in the kitchen because they were covered in blood. After that, we both went to lie down on our bed. We brought the hammer to our room. I laid it on a chair next to our bed. Christine adds, I have no regrets. I did not plan my crime. I had no hatred towards them. But I do not accept the gesture that Mrs. Lancelin had towards me tonight. In fact, Mrs. Lancelin had only raised her hand as if to slap her. So how could one explain their ferociousness and the disproportion between a small reprimand and the horrific crime which then ensued?
Quelques jours après le double meurtre, a lieu l'enterrement de Madame Lancelin et de sa fille. Des milliers de personnes, évidemment, suivent le cortège. D'autres milliers de personnes assistent tout le long du chemin au passage du dit cortège. Et c'est très impressionnant parce que il y a évidemment deux corbillards. Le premier avec des chevaux noirs et tout tendu de toile noire, normalement. Mais le deuxième, ce sont des chevaux carapassonnés de blanc et le corbillard et le cercueil lui-même sont blancs parce que Mademoiselle Lancelin était une jeune fille. Ce qui fait que ce meurtre est devenu vraiment, a été connu dans toute la France, et ça reste encore aujourd'hui l'affaire criminelle sartoise la plus connue dans tout l'Hexagone. C'est évidemment, je crois que ce qui a marqué les esprits, c'est l'arrachage des yeux. Un double meurtre, malheureusement, il y en a eu beaucoup, mais l'arrachage des yeux, ça, à ma connaissance, c'est unique dans l'histoire criminelle française.
There is insanity in the extreme violence of the act. To help understand these actions, a psychiatric examination of the two sisters is called for. We must go back to the history of the Papin family to imagine Christine and Lea's character. Gustave, their father, married Clémence Derret on October 3rd, 1901, despite his parents' disapproval, who regarded Clémence as a scheming woman. In the small village of Saint-Marc-du-Tillet, Clémence was the talk of the town after her supposed affair with her boss, Mr. Gouged. But Gustave was madly in love, and Clémence was pregnant. So despite all opposition, the marriage took place. Baby Emilia is born on February the 12th, 1902. Clémence is authoritarian. She dreams of a comfortable life and has no affection for her daughter or indeed for her husband. Gustave asks himself questions. Was she really having an affair with Mr. Gouged? Jealous, he tries to surprise the couple, in vain. He decides the family should move to another village, hoping his wife will change if her suspected lover is no longer close by. In July 1904, he announces to Clémence that he has been hired at the Marinier sawmill, 8 kilometers away, and that they will therefore be moving. She reacts furiously, telling him he's mad and threatening to kill herself rather than leave. But once her anger has subsided, she takes stock. She is pregnant again. She wants a divorce, but who would want a woman who's several months pregnant? She resigns herself to move to Marigny with little Emilia. On March the 8th, 1905, Clémence gives birth to Christine. But the relationship between Clémence and Gustave deteriorates, and Clémence constantly complains about how tired she is of taking care of the two children. Gustave therefore decides to entrust Christine to his sister, Isabelle, who also lives in Marigny. Isabelle lives on her own, and for her, men have always been the incarnation of evil. But she longs to be a mother and happily welcomes the girl. Christine will stay with her aunt for 7 years of happiness. In the autumn of 1910, the Papins settled in Le Mans. On September the 15th, 1911, Clémence gives birth to her third child, Lea. After the birth of her last child, Clémence leaves Gustave and asks for a divorce. Gustave sinks into alcoholism, so Clémence then entrusts Lea to her brother and places Emilia and Christine in the Bon Pasteur orphanage.
C'est une enfance qui a été manifestement donc privées d'affection maternelle et d'affection donc paternelle. Elles ont été donc très tôt retirées de leur mère, non pas par une intervention extérieure, mais parce que donc leur mère considérait que elle devait donc subvenir donc à ses propres besoins et à ceux de la famille, et qu'elle ne pouvait pas concilier le travail et puis le fait d'assurer l'éducation de ses enfants. Donc toutes les trois vont être placées dans des institutions donc religieuses, et Emilia, l'aînée, entrera d'ailleurs dans les ordres.
Christine planned to follow her sister's example. She had found her place in the Bon Pasteur institution, and community life suited her. But her mother didn't see things the same way. After her brother's death, she places Lea with the Sisters of St. Charles in Le Mans and impatiently waits for Christine to finish her schooling before taking her back in.
Clémence, donc la mère, Clémence Derret, a été très, très perturbée par le fait que sa fille entre au couvent, sa fille aînée. Et donc, les catholiques sont devenus ses persécuteurs, les preneurs de filles. Les preneurs de filles. Et donc, ça ne pouvait pas, à ses yeux, se reproduire une seconde fois. Ça ne pouvait pas se reproduire avec Christine, et qui sait avec Léa.
In 1920, Christine is 15 years old. Her mother withdraws her from the orphanage and places her as a maid with different employers. In April 1926, Christine works for the Lancelins. She is joined by her sister Lea, and this is the first time they work together. She takes her role as big sister very much to heart, echoing the gestures of protection Amelia had for her, and especially those of tenderness that her mother never gave them. Mrs. Lancelin is very demanding about the way she likes her house kept, but the two sisters apply themselves to their work conscientiously.
Pour les deux bonnes, Christine et Léa, le lever se fait à 7 heures du matin. Le matin, c'est le marché, c'est aussi la préparation du déjeuner. On peut aussi commencer à préparer le dîner du soir. Il y a davantage d'effervescence si la journée est un jour de réception. Et puis, après le déjeuner du midi, en principe, les domestiques avaient une liberté souvent de 2 heures. Elles étaient libres de faire ce qu'elles voulaient. Elles pouvaient sortir, rester dans leur chambre ou au contraire dans le logement qui leur était attribué. Elles percevaient des gages qui étaient des gages fixes tous les mois. Et puis, donc, de temps en temps, on pouvait bien sûr avoir d'autres compensations financières, des étrennes. Et dans le cas des sœurs Papin, comme on a aussi les premières assurances sociales, c'est Monsieur Lancelin qui, en plus des gages, a fait le nécessaire pour qu'elles puissent bénéficier d'une protection en cas d'accident.
Christine and Lea have finally found a stable position where they can settle down, until the incomprehensible tragedy. From their difficult childhood, starved of affection and love, experts will not find any trace of a psychological disorder. Christine and Lea Papin are pronounced sane. The two sisters have similar characteristics in all respects. Their mentality is in no way pathological and comparable in every sense, except that Christine is slightly more intelligent than her sister, and that Lea has a more closed and less expansive character. The report, however, reveals that Christine is attached to no one apart from her sister. Her character has no pathological abnormality, but only the peculiarity of being somewhat indifferent to everything, except perhaps the money she earns and her sister she loves. The relationship that unites the two sisters is special. In this affection, we cannot discern any dubious explanation or sexual attachment. It seems certain that Lea's affection for Christine is of a filial nature. For Lea, Christine represents the older sister, her big sister, her mother's substitute. The report concluded by saying, neither of them seems to have acted on the suggestion of another. We must simply admit that the two sisters acted together with the same ferociousness and with the same relentlessness only because of the communion of their own feelings and ideas. The two sisters are therefore responsible for their actions. A fully shared responsibility.
Chez Monsieur et Madame Lancelin, les deux jeunes filles se trouvent très bien. Alors, comment est-il possible qu'au bout de 7 ans, elles passent soudain comme ça à un déchaînement de violence au point d'assassiner leur patronne et sa fille et au point de leur arracher les yeux vivantes? Alors, il y a évidemment tout un tas de réponses, mais moi, j'en ai trouvé qu'une seule de satisfaisante et je crois que maintenant, on a enfin compris et on ose dire les choses qui étaient impossibles à dire au moment du procès. Le mot-clé, c'est homosexualité. Il faut se rappeler qu'en 1933, l'homosexualité, on va dire ordinaire, était sévèrement réprimée par la loi. Alors en plus, l'homosexualité entre deux sœurs, imaginez, c'était impossible d'en parler. Cette homosexualité fait que les deux sœurs, quand elles sont découvertes en quelque sorte par leur patronne, que Christine vient à sa rencontre dans l'escalier, qu'elle comprend que sa patronne a saisi ce qui se passait, à partir de ce moment-là, c'est un déchaînement de violence. Elle va tuer sa patronne, elle va tuer la fille de sa patronne, et elle va les énucléer, au moins en partie, pendant qu'elles sont encore vivantes, parce qu'elle veut faire table rase, elle veut supprimer ses yeux qui l'ont vu surgir en peignoir et qui ont compris ce qui se passait depuis des années, vraisemblablement, dans cette maison.
The investigation will last 25 weeks. Over the course of the accused's questioning, it will come to light that Christine's influence over her sister was predominant. Christine's questioning on July the 12th, 1933, will be decisive. After several fits of madness in her cell, reported by her fellow inmates and the prison guards, she asks to be heard by the examining magistrate. I haven't told you the whole truth, she says. When I attacked Mrs. Lancelin, she had not provoked me. I was overcome by a nervous fit, and I threw myself at her without her expecting it. I first knocked her down with a blow to the head with a pitcher. Miss Lancelin appeared. I also hit her with a pewter pitcher. In a gesture of defense, she grabbed my hair. I knocked her down and I tore her eye out. My sister Lea arrived at that moment, and seeing that Mrs. Lancelin was about to get up, she threw herself on her. I told her to tear her eyes out, and then I gave her the pitcher to smash her head with. Then I went down to get a knife and a hammer to slaughter them with. Lea, after hearing her sister, also comes clean with the truth. My sister was upset by the incident with the iron, and that's when she went into a furious fit. I'd never seen her in such a state.
Ce qui apparaît, c'est que quand elles répondent aux interrogatoires, elles sont habitées par certaines intentions. Dans un premier temps, par exemple, Léa répond exactement de la même façon que Christine. Et donc, on soupçonne qu'il y a anguille sous roche, mais on ne sait pas quoi exactement. Et ensuite, les rapports entre Christine et Léa ayant été modifiés à un moment donné, par ce qui s'est passé dans la prison du Mans, à ce moment-là, la transformation de leur lien, c'est-à-dire le fait que ce lien se casse, à ce moment-là, les données des interrogatoires se présentent de manière différente. Mais c'est de nouveau aussi au service de certaines intentions. Par exemple, Christine tient beaucoup à se charger de l'entière responsabilité du crime. Donc c'est plus un crime à deux, c'est un crime fait par Christine auquel Léa a participé. Donc vous voyez, ça change. Mais là aussi, il y a en quelque sorte un enjeu, on pourrait presque dire politique, stratégique en tout cas, qui fait que cette seconde version, on s'en est contenté, mais elle n'est guère plus vraie que la première. Donc il y a toujours une question de ce qui est en jeu dans le témoignage, qui n'est pas de dire la vérité, mais le témoignage sert une certaine intention.
The prosecution, carried out on August the 25th, 1933, accuses Christine Papin of murdering Léonie Lancelin and Geneviève Lancelin in Le Mans on February the 2nd, 1933. Lea Papin is accused of willfully killing Léonie Lancelin. The trial of the Papin sisters starts on September the 29th, 1933, in Le Mans. 200 police are requisitioned to control the large crowd that has gathered, as well as journalists sent by France's most important newspapers. The Parisian press is especially numerous, with Paris Soir, Le Petit Parisien, Le Matin, and Le Quotidien. Since February the 2nd, the details of the crime in all their horror have circulated through all the newsrooms. The insanity of the two sisters fueled the daily columns throughout the whole of 1933, and the trial was to be the climax. At 1:30 p.m., President Boucher, Prosecutor Riegeur, Monsieur Bouvier, Desnos and Jeanvrin, judges at the court of first instance of Le Mans, as well as the court clerk, Monsieur Dubois, enter the courtroom. When the accused are brought in, all eyes turn to the two sisters. The public is disappointed. They expect to see two Jezebels. Christine appears, her eyes downcast, a bun set low at the back of her neck, her face thin and drawn. She is wearing a beige coat. Lea looks frightened. She wears a dark coat. Throughout the whole trial, they will keep a humble attitude, obedient to any request. They respond to questions timidly, with short whispered sentences that are almost inaudible. Christine admits to all the facts alleged against her, but gives no explanation for her acts. Experts called to testify speak of the mental responsibility of the two girls. They see no psychological disorder. Christine's examination, carried out by Dr. Schutzenberger, shows no physical abnormality, no memory impairment, nor family history. Her IQ is average. Her affections show some particularities. They are only focused on her younger sister, Lea. The same observations are made with Lea, only that her intelligence seems less developed. Her affections towards Christine, however, are very strong.
Trois experts qui ont été commis d'abord par le tribunal. Les trois experts ont rendu un rapport d'une médiocrité accablante. On négligeait beaucoup de détails sur lesquels ils auraient dû s'appesantir. Par exemple, à un moment donné, Christine et Léa vont voir le maire du Mans et se plaignent d'être persécutés. Le maire le dit, le commissaire de police le dit. Les experts passent. C'est comme s'ils n'avaient rien su de cet incident. Tout se joue dans une vie sur des petits incidents mineurs. Tout se joue sur des petits détails. Et les experts, leur savoir est tel et d'un degré de généralité tel que quand ils le mettent en œuvre, ce savoir les aveugle sur ce qui compte, c'est-à-dire les petits détails.
To counter the opinion of the three experts appointed by the court, Drs. Schutzenberger, Baruch, and Truel, who had established that the two sisters were sane, the defense calls Dr. Logre, the police headquarters doctor, to the bar. He first of all highlights the contrast between the motive of the crime, which is extremely weak, and the violence, ferocity, tenacity, and the enucleation which is unprecedented. He then invokes the extraordinary moral duo formed by the two sisters. The personality of the younger sister is absolutely annihilated by that of the elder. He wonders about the possible diagnosis of hysteroepilepsy.
Le docteur Logre va esquisser une proposition qui fera sensation auprès de certains journaux. Il va dire qu'il connaît l'identité du coupable. L'identité du coupable, ce n'est pas Christine, ce n'est pas Léa, c'est un troisième personnage. Alors évidemment, quand il annonce cela, le silence est complet, tous les regards sont rivés vers lui, et il poursuit sa démonstration en disant « Le troisième coupable, c'est le couple formé par Léa et Christine Papin ».
Dr. Logre concludes by saying that he cannot say whether the Papin sisters acted in a fit of madness, but that legal experts cannot proclaim that they are normal. Mr. Chauton, Lea Papin's lawyer, then asks for a further investigation on the mental state of the accused and a referral of the case to a later date. The request will not be granted. The court, considering that the first appointed experts had sufficiently examined the accused, decide that there was no reason to delay the trial. The die was cast. Christine and Lea Papin could go on trial. Part of the press had chosen sides. The Détective et l'Humanité portrayed the Papin sisters as victims of the bourgeois world. Within the theme of class struggle, they were depicted as the slaves of a society full of nouveaux riches who exploited them.
Le crime des sœurs Papin sera considéré comme un crime de classe. Ce sont donc les malheureuses, les exploitées qui, à force de courber les chines, à un moment donné, vont se réveiller, sont révoltées, et comme elles ne savent pas comment faire, elles vont passer directement au crime. Et puis le deuxième périodique, qui à cette époque-là est un périodique qui a une audience très importante, c'est le journal Détective. Alors, le journal Détective de 1933 ne ressemble pas tout à fait à celui d'aujourd'hui. Le journal Détective est né en 1928. Il a une caution littéraire, les frères Kessel y ont été associés, un certain nombre de personnalités du monde judiciaire, des avocats, des magistrats. Et le journal Détective va envoyer donc un envoyé spécial, et celui-ci va faire un reportage qui va véritablement donc marquer les esprits. On peut en donner un exemple. Simone de Beauvoir, dans ses mémoires, Mémoires d'une jeune fille rangée, relate qu'avec Jean-Paul Sartre, elle se précipitait sur le journal Détective pour prendre connaissance comme ça des faits divers qui les intéressaient, puisque au-delà du fait un peu sanglant, c'était un révélateur de la société, et c'était une manière de mieux comprendre les groupes sociaux, les sociétés, et puis éventuellement l'intérieur des familles. Et donc pour Simone de Beauvoir, il n'y a pas de doute, en février 1933, le crime des sœurs Papin, c'est aussi donc le crime de la révolte, le crime de la misère, le crime de l'exploitation qui prend son nom et qui n'hésite pas à passer à l'acte.
Mr. Moulier, who represents the Lancelin family, responds to the press's allegations by highlighting how well the family treated their staff. The Papin sisters were fed just as their masters were. The servants earned over 150 francs per month. They therefore have no excuse, he adds, addressing the court and the jury. I ask you to be unforgiving. They deserve no mercy. And since the hatred they had in their heart for their mistress inspired them in the crimes they committed, to revert to the refinements of torture and cruelty that are found only in savages, as they conducted themselves like wild beasts, they should be treated as savages and wild beasts. One must be eliminated, as the law allows you to eliminate her, and the other must be put out of harm's way forever. Mr. Moulier's plea ends at 7:25 p.m. The audience is adjourned. Then at 9 p.m, everyone returns to their seat. An end must be brought to this horrible affair, and everyone is determined to finish with it that evening. The fate of the Papin sisters will be played out in 12 hourly strikes of the clock. Prosecutor Riageur strikes the first chime. There is the rabid dog that bites and rips because he is sick. There is the vicious dog that bites because he is bad-tempered. The first one always bites, no matter what happens. It is irresponsible. The second is capable of affection. He will lick the hand of his master who strokes him, but it will bite his hand if the caress seems too harsh. The Papin girls are in no way sick. They are not rabid dogs. They are aggressive, vicious dogs. And to finish his plea, Prosecutor Riageur will recommend to the jury, have no pity for these monstrous eye gougers. I implore of you, be ruthless, be inexorable. I demand the maximum penalty. For this one, the galleys, and for the other, the scaffold. For the two defense lawyers, Mr. Germain Brière, who defends Christine, and Mr. Chauton defending Lea, the task at hand is a tough one. They must demonstrate the two sisters' irresponsibility by highlighting a psychiatric disorder that experts have not found. The accused must be considered ill and put into an asylum rather than prison. Once the defense speech is over, the chairman calls upon the accused, but the two sisters remain silent. The court then retires to deliberate. 40 minutes will suffice for the 12 jurors to decide the Papin sisters' fate. The court and the jury condemn Christine Papin to death and order that she be conducted to one of the public squares in the city of Le Mans to be beheaded. Lea Papin is sentenced to 10 years of hard labor and 20 years of exile. The chairman adjourns the trial at 1:15 a.m. and declares the case of the Papin sisters closed. Nevertheless, what if the two girls were well and truly mad? This question will be taken up by the press, intellectuals, and the world of psychiatry, which call itself into question. In December 1933, the psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan publishes in Minotaur Journal a study entitled The Motives of Paranoid Crime, Papin Sisters' Crime. He explains the act of the Papin sisters as a case of paranoia and folie à deux, or twin delirium, which Christine and Lea are not aware of.
Pour lui, cette union, c'est le fait que ce soit un couple de même sexe. Et pour lui, le fait que ce soit un couple de même sexe, sans figure masculine, ou en tout cas sans figure paternelle, seraient donc les éléments donc, essentiels du crime paranoïaque. S'agit-il plutôt d'un crime paranoïaque ou d'un crime que les spécialistes appelleraient aujourd'hui plutôt d'un crime psychotique? Bon, là, peu importe, mais en tout cas, donc c'est l'union psychologique de Christine et Léa, qui sont, il ne faut pas l'oublier, hein, c'est une sorte de quatuor. Les deux victimes sont deux femmes, mère et fille. Il n'y a pas non plus là de représentants donc, masculines, il y a une sorte de rivalité entre les deux, et c'est un huis clos comme ça, un quadrille horrible, je crois, avait écrit Lacan, qui s'est noué dans ce palier de la premier étage de la rue Bruyère dans la ville du Mans.
In 1964, Louis Le Guillon, in the journal Modern Times, directed by Jean-Paul Sartre, presents the case of the Papin sisters as a crime of master-servant relationships. For several years, essays, novels, and plays will tell the tragic story of the Papin sisters. The film by Jean-Pierre Denis, Murderous Maids, in 2000, will once again recall the terrible crime. On January the 22nd, 1934, a missive arrives at the office of the prosecutor of Le Mans. Albert Lebrun, the President of the Republic, modifies Christine Papin's death sentence into hard labor for life. Mr. Briere's relentless work has paid off, despite Christine's stubbornness, who has walled herself into silence. Emaciated and very weak, she refuses to eat. Staring into space, she refuses to sign her clemency. Germaine Briere invoked her irresponsibility. 2 days later, Christine is transferred to the central prison in Rennes. On May the 12th, 1934, Dr. Porez, the prison doctor, requests that Christine Papin be given an emergency psychiatric examination. Her mental state requires it. On May the 25th, she is admitted into the service of Dr. Guillaume at the Saint-Méline Asylum in Rennes. He discovers a state of melancholy. She refuses to eat. Christine herself believes that she should not live because she says she was sentenced to death. He adds that she is engaged in a schizophrenic spiral. Put in the presence of her sister, she refuses to recognize her. Locking herself inside her delirium and increasingly weakened, she will die on May the 18th, 1937, from pulmonary problems subsequent to her malnutrition.
Quand on suit l'affaire tout du long, on s'aperçoit que Christine, en quelque sorte, se laisse mourir à l'hôpital psychiatrique, se laisse mourir très rapidement de faim, ce qu'on appelait cachexie vésanique, habitée en quelque sorte par un délire mystique. C'est-à-dire qu'elle a retrouvé, après le passage à l'acte, après ce qui s'est passé en prison et sa rupture avec Léa, elle a trouvé en quelque sorte, elle a trouvé son Dieu. C'est-à-dire quelqu'un à qui on peut dire que ta volonté soit faite. Donc une boucle se réalise, si vous voulez, depuis l'entrée d'Emilia au Bon Pasteur, jusqu'après toute l'histoire, toute l'affaire, le fait que de manière différente, Christine et Léa se retrouvent avec Dieu en quelque sorte.
As for Lea, she adapts to life in prison. Assigned to the waterproof clothing workshop, she's considered a very good worker, and her character is viewed as gentle. She corresponds regularly with her mother, who works in Le Mans as a cook and housekeeper. On February the 2nd, 1943, at the age of 31, Lea is released from prison. She will go with her mother to Nantes, where she will quietly rebuild her life. She dies in Nantes on July the 24th, 2001, at the age of 89, taking with her the mystery of the senseless act that she committed with her sister.